Sergeant Dale Kessler's hand closed around the edge of the packet before Dr. Renata Osei had taken 3 steps into the plaza.
"That doesn't leave this building,"
he said.
"Not until I know what's in it."
She didn't stop walking.
You don't have the authority to ask me that.
I have every authority. I run records access here. His fingers tightened against the paper. So either you tell me what's sealed inside that packet you just carried out of my wing, or I find out for you. By the time the sun dropped behind the courthouse dome that afternoon, a man who had worn a badge for 21 years would be in handcuffs, and the case that ended his career would be sitting in an evidence bag with his own fingerprints all over the tear. But standing in the parking plaza at 10:40 that morning, Renata didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that a sergeant twice her size had planted himself between her and her car, and he was staring at the red wax seal like it owed him an explanation. Harlan County Courthouse sat at the center of town, the way old buildings do when nobody's gotten around to replacing them, limestone gone the color of weak coffee. A wide stone plaza out front where deputies parked their cruisers, nose in along the curb. Renata had walked this plaza every weekday for 8 months, badge clipped low, expression pleasant and forgettable. She was a forensic evidence auditor under federal contract, and for 8 months her entire strategy had depended on one fact: nobody here knew her name. That ended the moment Kessler decided to learn it. He'd noticed her the way he noticed everything in the records wing, instinctively, possessively. He'd run that wing for 11 years. He knew every clerk, every regular defense investigator, every face that had a reason to be back there. He didn't know this one. A woman in a plain cream coat, moving too calmly, carrying something sealed with a red wax stamp he'd only seen once or twice before. His stomach dropped before his brain caught up to why. Because for 3 weeks, Dale Kessler had been waiting for the walls to close in, a subpoena to a colleague in property and evidence, a records request he'd quietly slow-walked and couldn't kill, a feeling, low and constant, that someone out there was pulling threads he'd spent a decade making sure nobody pulled. He didn't know her name. He didn't know how long she'd been coming in and out of that wing, or what she'd spent 8 months quietly building, or why she carried herself like someone who had already finished the hardest part of a very long job. All he knew was the shape of his own fear, and the fact that whatever was inside that packet felt, somehow, like it had his name on it. Sergeant. Her voice stayed even. I have a court-authorized reason to be here, and I have somewhere I need to be. If you have a concern, you can call the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they'll confirm my clearance in about 90 seconds. I'm not calling anybody. I'm asking you. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the vending machine coffee on his breath. What's your name? That's not something I'm required to give you in this situation. Everybody's required to give me their name when I ask for it. He said it like a man reciting a rule he'd made up himself so long ago he'd forgotten he'd made it up. Deputy Marcus Rendon, 26, 6 months off training, stood a few feet back with his hand hovering near his radio and said nothing, not because he agreed, but because 6 months in, he'd already learned that agreeing out loud with Kessler's targets cost more than staying quiet. Renata held the packet against her chest with both arms now, not defensively, just the way you hold something you've decided will not leave your hands. I'm going to walk to my car, she said. You're welcome to write down my plate number if it makes you feel better. I'm not writing down a plate number. I'm looking at that seal. His eyes hadn't left it. Red wax, thick, unbroken. The kind that wasn't cheap and wasn't decorative. The kind that existed for exactly one reason, to prove nobody had touched what was inside. You know how many people walk out of a records wing carrying something official looking, and it turns out to be nothing? 0. Nobody carries something sealed like that unless it's supposed to hurt somebody. Then you understand why it's not yours to open. Something in the way she said it, flat, unhurried, like she was reading him a fact rather than making an argument, made Rendon glance at her face for the first time. Most people, 3 minutes into a stop like this, had started explaining themselves too much, or not at all. She was doing neither. She was doing something closer to waiting. Kessler noticed it too, and it didn't calm him down. It did the opposite. Hand it over, he said. Last time, I asked nice. No. The word landed in the plaza and didn't move. A courthouse clerk crossing toward the side entrance slowed her step, glanced over, kept walking, with her eyes down. A woman loading a stroller into a minivan, 2 rows away, looked up at the raised voices.
and then quickly looked back down at the car seat buckle, deciding, the way people do, that this wasn't hers to get involved in.
Kessler reached out and closed his hand around the packet's edge. Renata didn't let go. "You do not want to be the one who opens this," she said, quiet enough that only he and Rendon could hear it. "I am telling you that as a fact, not a threat. Whatever you think is inside, you're wrong. And once it's open, there's no putting it back." For half a second, something flickered behind Kessler's eyes. Not doubt exactly, but the ghost of it, gone as fast as it arrived. Because a woman he'd never seen before, standing in a parking lot with her arms wrapped around a sealed packet, had just told him with total certainty that he didn't understand what he was holding. And Dale Kessler had built 21 years on the belief that he always understood exactly what he was holding. His grip tightened. "We'll see about that," he said, and pulled. "Before we find out what's inside that sealed packet, tell us what you think is in it. Like, subscribe, and stay with us, because Kessler is about to discover he made a mistake he can't undo." The packet didn't tear. Not yet. Renata's grip held, and for a full second the two of them stood frozen in the plaza, both hands locked on the same object, a wax seal between them like a held breath. Then Kessler let go first, not because he decided to, but because Rendon's voice cut through the moment. "Sarge, there's people watching." There were. A courthouse maintenance worker had stopped near the side door, phone half raised, uncertain whether to actually record or just look like he might. The woman with the stroller was still there too, no longer pretending not to notice. Kessler stepped back and rearranged his approach. "ID," he said. "Now. That's not optional. I've already told you I have a court-authorized reason to be here. That's not an ID. That's a sentence." He held out his hand, palm up. "License, or I call it in as a refusal to identify." Renata considered him for a moment, not with fear, but with the specific patience of someone recalculating a cost. Then she handed it over. He studied it too long, turning it, checking the edges, looking for a reason to distrust something that was plainly real. When he reached for it, his other hand closed around her wrist, and in the same motion he lifted her phone out of the open front pocket of her bag and dropped it into his own jacket. She felt the weight leave the bag before she fully registered what he'd done. "That's evidence too, until I say otherwise," he said, and walked back toward the cruiser to read her name into the radio. Renata Osei. Rendon watched him go, then looked at her. "You don't have to answer anything else," he said, quiet enough that it wasn't quite defiance, but wasn't nothing either. "I know," she said, "but thank you." It took 90 seconds for the system to come back clean. No warrants, no record, not even a parking citation. Kessler stared at the screen a beat too long before getting back out of the cruiser. "Clean," he said, like the word itself was an accusation. "Then I can go. You can go when I say you can go." He nodded at the packet, still pressed against her chest. "Set that on the hood." "No. I've got probable cause to detain you until I determine what that is." "You don't. You have a hunch and a badge. Those aren't the same thing, and you know it." He reached for her arm. Not violently, but with the flat, procedural grip of a man, used to people complying the moment contact was made. She didn't fight it, but she didn't help either, and the packet slipped between them in the scuffle, hit the asphalt, skidded a foot, and came to rest face up in the sun. For a moment nobody moved. Then Kessler crouched down and picked it up himself. He turned it over slowly, this time without her hands in the way. The seal caught the light, a deep, unbroken red, pressed into shape by something that hadn't been improvised. He'd seen a seal like this once before, years ago, holding a subpoena he'd been ordered to deliver personally because nobody trusted it to the regular mail. He remembered how careful everyone had been with that one, how many hands it passed through, and how none of them touched the seal itself. The memory didn't make him careful now, it made him angrier. "You want to tell me why you've got something like this riding around in a backpack instead of a courier lockbox? Because I was told to hand deliver it myself." "Told by who?" "Someone whose name you're not going to get from me in a parking lot." He looked at Rendon, then at the small crowd. He looked back at the packet in his hand. Someone was building a case against him. He'd felt it for weeks. And this, whatever it was Might be his only chance to see it before it was too late to stop it. He held the packet up to the light, studying the seal the way a man studies a lock he's already decided to break. Last chance, he said. Tell me what's inside, or I find out myself. By the time Kessler dragged her toward the hood of her own car, the crowd near the side entrance had grown to 8. Nobody moved to help. A security guard from the building's front desk stood in the doorway with his radio in his hand and didn't lift it. Phones stayed half raised, never fully. Nobody wanted to be the first. Sarge. Rendon again, closer this time. This isn't, we don't have grounds for this. We have grounds for whatever I say we have grounds for. Kessler didn't look at him. He was looking at Renata, at the packet in his own hand, at the way she hadn't made a sound when her shoulder hit the hood. You want to keep telling me my job, or you want to write the report? Rendon went quiet. His camera kept recording. That was the only thing he still had control over, and he knew it, and the knowing sat in his stomach like something spoiled. Kessler leaned down until his face was level with hers. IA, he said. That's it, isn't it? Somebody at Internal Affairs finally found somebody with a law degree who'd listen. Or is it a defense attorney? Somebody trying to reopen a case, dig up something old, make it look like, I'm not going to confirm or deny anything you make up standing in a parking lot. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. It's an answer to a question you don't have the right to ask. Something about the precision of it, the way she kept handing him exact, careful language, instead of the fear he was used to, seemed to convince him more than any confession could have. In his mind, only someone with something specific to protect spoke that carefully. He didn't consider the alternative, that some people spoke carefully because it was the only language that had ever kept them safe. Last time, he said, tell me what's inside. I already told you what happens if you don't listen. Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped, low enough that he had to lean in to catch it. And something about that, about her making him come closer to hear the warning, instead of raising her voice to give it, put a thin line of sweat on his neck that had nothing to do with the sun. You open that, there is no undoing it. Not for you. Not for anyone standing here. You keep saying that, like it's supposed to scare me. It's not supposed to scare you. It's supposed to be true. Whether it scares you is up to you. He straightened up, looked at Rendon, looked at the small, silent crowd by the doors, and something in him, the part that had spent 3 weeks waiting for a phone call that never came, a subpoena that never arrived, a knock on a door that stayed shut, decided that a room full of witnesses watching him hesitate was worse than a room full of witnesses watching him act. He turned the packet over in his hands. Sarge, please, Rendon started. Write it down, Marsh. Kessler's voice cracked slightly on the wrong name, the ghost of some earlier partner from some earlier year, and he didn't even seem to notice he'd said it. Write down that I opened it. Write down whatever you want. He dug his thumb under the edge of the wax. Renata didn't look away. She didn't beg, didn't repeat herself a third time, didn't reach for it. She had said what needed saying twice, clearly, in front of a witness whose camera was still running, and the rest, she understood now, watching his thumb find the gap in the seal, had never really been her choice to make. It was his. It had been his from the first second his hand closed around the edge of it in the plaza 40 minutes ago. The wax cracked. It came away in one long piece, red and unbroken, and for a moment Kessler held it in his fingers like a small, strange trophy before letting it drop to the asphalt. The flap came loose. He turned the packet over, and the contents slid halfway out onto the burning hood of her car, a thick stack of paper, photographs clipped to typed sheets, something that looked like sworn statements bound with a metal clasp. On top, face up in the sun, sat a single cover page, federal seal, centered. Below it, in bold block type, 3 words and a dash that Kessler read once, then read again. His mouth already forming a question he wouldn't get to finish out loud. In R.E., Grand Jury Investigation. The rest of the line ran on beneath it. A name typed in the same bold type, close enough to read if he'd had one more second to look. He didn't get the second. A car door slammed somewhere behind him, sharp, close, wrong for a courthouse lot at this hour. and 4 men in dark suits were already crossing the plaza at a pace that wasn't quite a run, but wasn't anything else either. And the last thing Kessler heard before his eyes dropped back to the page was one of them calling out a name across 40 feet of open concrete. Not Renata's, his own. 3 weeks later, a federal courtroom in the state capitol sat still enough to hear the air conditioning cycle on. Renata sat in the gallery, not the witness stand. Her testimony had already been entered into the record 2 days earlier, calm and exact, the same way she'd spoken in the parking lot. Today belonged to sentencing. Sergeant Dale Kessler stood beside his attorney in a suit that didn't fit him the way his uniform had. He didn't look at the gallery. He hadn't looked at much of anything since the arraignment. Judge Elena Whitaker read the charges without raising her voice, because she didn't need to. Destruction of sealed federal evidence, obstruction of a federal investigation, evidence tampering across 6 wrongful convictions. She paused before the sentence, and when she spoke again, it was directly to him. You were given a warning 3 separate times by the one person in that parking lot who understood exactly what you were holding, she said. You chose, 3 separate times, to believe your own assumptions instead. That choice is the entire reason we're here today. The judge sentenced him to 9 years in federal prison and permanently revoked his law enforcement certification. It wasn't the only consequence handed down that month. The sworn statement from the former evidence technician had done more than confirm the 6 cases in the packet. It had given federal investigators a map. 5 more names surfaced in the weeks that followed, cases Kessler had touched over the years that had never made it into anyone's file until someone finally started looking at all of them at once. 2 Harlan County supervisors resigned rather than face questions about what they'd signed off on without checking. The department entered a federal consent decree, independent oversight of the evidence room, mandatory chain of custody audits twice a year, a hotline that didn't route through anyone Kessler had ever called a friend. None of it gave back the 11 years stolen from people who had trusted the system to protect them. The name that mattered most to Renata wasn't Kessler's. It was Thomas Reyes. He was one of the 6, convicted 9 years earlier on evidence Kessler had logged personally, evidence the technician's sworn statement proved had been altered before it ever reached a jury. Renata had read his file more times than she could count over the past 8 months. She had never met him. That was supposed to change on a Tuesday morning in October, outside a state correctional facility 2 hours north of Harlan County. She got there before his family did. He came through the gate in street clothes donated by the public defender's office, blinking against the daylight like he'd forgotten what freedom looked like. His mother reached him first, and for a long moment nobody said anything at all, just the sound of someone crying the specific kind of tears that only come after 9 years. When he finally looked past his mother's shoulder, he found Renata standing a few feet back, giving the family room. You're the one who found it, he said. It wasn't a question either. I found what was already true, she said. That's all I ever did. He didn't have a speech ready, and neither did she. He just nodded, the way people do when words haven't caught up yet, and reached out to shake her hand instead. She took it. That was the whole moment. No cameras. No press conference. Just 2 people who understood, without needing to explain it to each other, exactly what 9 years had cost, and what one sealed packet had finally returned. A month after that, Renata drove back through Harlan County on a Tuesday afternoon. No particular reason, the way you sometimes drive past a place just to see what it looks like now. The courthouse plaza was the same. Same limestone gone the color of weak coffee. Same rows of cruisers parked nose-in along the curb. A deputy walked out the front entrance, badge camera blinking steadily on his chest, and held the door for a woman carrying a stack of files. She thanked him. He nodded and kept walking. An ordinary moment. The kind that's only ordinary because nothing underneath it is broken anymore. Renata parked in the same spot she had that morning in the plaza, cracked asphalt and all, and sat for a minute with the windows down. She thought about the seal, how many hands had tried to break it before that day, how many hadn't been strong enough to matter, and how the one that finally did had belonged to the person it was built to protect the world from. She thought about Thomas Reyes walking through a gate into daylight. Then she started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and drove north toward whatever came next. Pride and abuse of power can blind us to the consequences of our own choices. Kessler was warned several times, but he refused to listen, and ultimately, his own actions became the evidence that destroyed him. The truth may be buried for years, but it doesn't stay buried forever. Have you ever watched someone destroy their own future with their own hands, knowing they were the only person who could have stopped it? Tell me what you think in the comments. If this story moved you, tap like and subscribe for more stories about truth, justice, and the moments that quietly change everything. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration.